All right, there we go. Let's look at these. Command open. Since I don't trust it. That's nothing. Line to pieces. Ooh. My mistake. There we go. Okay. Hey. I'm not sure I will do that actually. Change my mind on that one. Where did I? Okay, here we go. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. My eyeglasses on. I believe. I'm gonna have this person's name. I'm not seeing the face. I'm usually seeing Krista Baldino. Oh, there you are right there in front. Okay, Krista Baldino. Jennifer Bednar. Jennifer Bednar. No? Okay. Ariana Brooks. Ariana, sorry. Laurel Cortazar. Victoria Dunstan, Georgia Eppheimer, Jana Fusco, okay, Fusco, Isabella Gartner, no, Isabella, nope. Madeline Griscavage, Is it Emily Carilla? Carilla? Not gonna find out, she's not here apparently. Caitlin Kisner, Lily Kratz, Victoria Carwinkle Peralta, Jewel Leonard, Avery Maciak, Rael Margalis, okay. Danielle Miller. Oh, actually, okay. Isabel Morgan. Jonathan Paniagua, okay. Arizona Rentschler. Ashley Raya. Yeah. Lisa Schwartztrauber. Emily Shaw. Andrew Slaptish. Janelle Smith. Zachary Stolzilgi. No, Stolzilgi, sorry. Two choices and I got them. I'll get it, sir. Don't worry. This is how I learn. Mariah Volch. Mariah, right?
Yeah.
Volch, Sarah Wagner, but no. Okay, Samantha Waits. And sorry, Colin Decker. Yes. Okie dokie. Anyone? Oh, is there anyone whose name I didn't call? Anyone sign up? Yes, sir.
Matthew Marino.
Okay, Matthew Marino. Oops. Matthew. Anybody else? Okay, so Mr. Marino, just there's a video that I put on YouTube for the course. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you go on Blackboard, there should be some announcements about it. But there's a YouTube link that I sent out. I guess I'll have to send it to you as well because I sent it out to those who were in the course at the time, were users. I sent out links to the video where I go over the syllabus for the first class, since it was not canceled, but it was held virtually, yes, because they changed the move-in date for the students. So you'll need to look at that, and I also sent out an email with various links to the Google Drive for the course, so you can get to the readings. You should be able to get to the readings if you go through the Blackboard links, hopefully. And you can also get to the recording that's on Google Drive that I just mentioned. It's just that Google makes you use third-party software. It doesn't open it immediately, the video. So it's just easy to just cut through the middleman and go to YouTube. Okay, so you might need to send me an email to remind me to send you that. But okay. Now, Gabriella. Now I remember the last name, Gianna Fusco. Yes, asked an excellent question. She asked a question about the reading from Alan Andrews, I believe, yes? Which he's talking about, well, in the reading, he's kind of talking about trying to bring together these two competing factions within religious studies. One faction he calls normative, and the other faction he calls social scientific. And Gianna Fusco's question was about which of these, or what do these mean? What are these basically? The normative, actually, let's get this out of the way for the moment, because I'm on Zoom recording this and I just want to make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. Nevertheless, I am backing up on my other computer this time, hopefully correctly.
the normative is basically what I would call theological. It's a form of, basically the normative is committed study, those who are committed to a certain religious point of view, okay, which they take to be normative for their study of religion. So say someone who's a Christian, but who studies other religions, like say Hinduism or, excuse me, studies like Hinduism or something, is coming at that from a normative perspective. The person is a Christian, would identify as a Christian, presumably a believer if the person's going to identify as that. So that's their norm, that's their standard, but they're also studying other religions and maybe even using Christianity as a tool to study other religions. So normative is kind of like what I would call theology, which I'll talk about later. The social scientific is, I think, where Andrews is kind of dumping all the natural sciences, okay? Natural sciences, and some of them which are kind of like the natural sciences. What do I mean by that? Well, things like anthropology, sociology, better not move around or people won't be able to see me, are not really natural sciences. They're not like geology or biology, okay? They're more artistic in a way. They're more artsy in that sense because, while yes, people like anthropologists might go out and they might learn languages to study, they might use archaeology and stuff like that, but there's a lot of interpretational effort that has to be made. What do these things mean? Whereas when you go into a chemistry lab, if you mix element A with element B or chemical A and chemical B, and poof, they react, and should react almost all the time, but not always. That's kind of a different thing. Geologists study rocks. You've got a rock in your hand. You can look at it. You can cut it up into little thin sheets and put it under a microscope, a certain type of microscope, and study its components. But a psychologist can't really study the mind. You can't really show the mind. You can show the brain. That's pretty easy if you're a neuroscientist or a psychiatrist. But a psychologist has to really deal with what people are thinking within that brain matter, okay? You can't really show, this is the mind. This is what the schizophrenic mind looks like inside. You can show what a schizophrenic brain looks like and how it reacts, but you can't really, if a schizophrenic is telling you that I'm seeing pink elephants dance around the room and they're telling me that I'm Napoleon and I have to go out and fight the Battle of Waterloo, okay, how do you quantify that? It's kind of different than, say, a geologist who can show you the rock that he's talking about or she's talking about. So the social scientific aspect that Andrews mentioned is really where he's talking about these things, anthropology, psychology, but also the natural sciences like, say, biology, evolutionary biology, or what else would he maybe be looking into? Genetics, stuff like that. Okay, does that help you understand what he's saying? What he's trying to do in the article is his method, which he likes to call humanistic, because he thinks he's kind of taking the whole human person together, not just the physical aspect of how we have evolved or how our brains work, how we sense and experience the world physically, but he also wants to take into that kind of that artistic element of meaning making, you might say. How do we make meaning out of the things that we experience, which we would call the norm? So he's trying to, through the humanistic method, to bring the normative method, which focuses on meaning. What meaning does religion have? What are the values? And taking that seriously and bringing it together with more scientific understandings of, well, when people say that they see things that other people don't see, but they say they're really there, are they really there? How is that? What's a hallucination? What's going on in the brain? Stuff like that. That would be more of a social scientific aspect or approach. So he wants to bring those two things together. He doesn't want to just discount what people say that they experience in religion, which can often happen in scientific studies, especially when you study the brain. Okay, people will say, well, when a person believes something, it excites this part of the brain. So that's where belief comes from. That's why people believe things. If a person says that he or she had a near-death experience and they were walking down the big white hall and they met Jesus, well, we can see that when a person starts to die, dopamine levels go through the roof, and that's probably what's happening. And that's all that's happening from, say, a social scientific perspective. The normative perspective might say, well, that's happening, but that doesn't really explain the meaning the person is giving to it. Why do they think they're going to see Jesus? Why does that, where's that coming from? The brain knows Jesus? The brain is just matter. It's just cells, right? Well, you tell me, some of you are in the health science. Okay, so that's my answer to that. If anything, if you want to ask anything more, then please be my guest, but that's what I'm going to say about that for the purposes of the article. Okay, I left off, let me get my PowerPoint here. It's talking about what is religion. Slideshow from the beginning. There we go. Actually, I think I have to, well, no, people don't need to see this. I can turn the camera, I think. Let me just, come up, so. Okay, let me just turn the camera a little bit so people can see. Hopefully. Actually, that's not actually very good. See what's going on with PowerPoint. There we go. Waiting for the projector to warm up. No controls for this device. Okay, whatever. Controls on your PC. Okay, no, I don't think I want to do that. There we go. Show image. Show image. Hide image, show image. Oh, you know why? The computer just went dark on me. It's went black. Let's turn that off and try again. All right. Sorry, I mean, because you're not seeing what I'm seeing, just the whole computer screen has gone completely black for no particular reason. And the monitor is on, it's not on hibernate. That's, try to turn it off or turn it back on. There we go. All right, so I got the computer screen back, assuming that it was the projector that took it. I don't know why. Try again. Okay. So it's showing it good. Okay. Start with that. Now, let's see. Talked about that. Talked about this. I finish with religio. Forget about the sacred. I'll skip over the sacred. I'll get to this point that I wanted to make about what is religion. What would I say that religion is about? Well, yeah, but if I want to hide it or show it, that. Okay. Many human cultures, as I mentioned, have words for this something that they experience, which nowadays we call religion in our language. In other languages, like if you're in India, they might say dharma, or in other religions, they might refer to this as refer to themselves as the Tao. But many cultures seem to recognize that there is this superhuman reality, powerful reality, and that this reality also has meaning that exists above human beings and yet is amongst us in some way. So you find this in different ways, many different ways in human cultures and societies, but you do find that there is some kind of power or meaning in the universe that transcends us, and people witness to this belief. People want to do things in relation to their beliefs. They don't just want to go to the football game. They want to wear the big foamy finger, or paint their faces, or wear stuff, or bang on drums, or whatever, chant. It's not just enough to be there present. They want to express their belief. Nothing unusual that this happens with religious beliefs. People have this belief in something that is powerful and meaningful, and they witness to that belief that there is this reality. And this reality is not just an empty reality, but this reality, this powerful force or meaningful reality, is filled with beings, various places, various things that are not part of the quote unquote real or ordinary world. They're not part of the normal world. They transcend it. They are somehow apart from it. And yet, this reality of things like gods or events or places, Mount Olympus, Mount Fuji in Japan, Mount Olympus in Greece, where people believe that Mount Olympus was the home of the gods, the Olympian gods, and Mount Fuji, I don't know if it's necessarily the home of any particular god, but it's certainly considered a very holy, sacred mountain by Japanese. Nevertheless, this reality interacts with humans and even interferes with our world, breaks in, as they say, into our world sometimes, our normal everyday world. And as I said, this reality is filled with power, and a certain power or force, a certain meaningfulness, a certain significance that some people otherwise don't find in the normal world, at least not fully as we might find it in the normal, ordinary world. Okay, so that's doing that. So I just keep checking because I'm paranoid about this technology. So this explains the world to people, this ultimate reality. This is what I'm talking about and getting to. This reality that we might call religion explains the world to people, which makes sense. I mean, if it transcends the cosmos, transcends the universe, it's above the universe, then it can be a way of explaining what's inside, i.e. the universe. And people believe that this reality is the only reality that provides final, ultimate fulfillment to human life. Now, in general, this is not always the case, but in general, when you're dealing with something like this, we might call religious, this world or this reality is not directly visible. It's not directly perceivable by normal means. Oftentimes it's invisible. You can't see it. Not always. A lot of the ancient religions are very, as I said, the gods live on Mount Olympus. If you would have believed, perhaps, I would think, that if you actually scaled the mountain of Mount Olympus in Greece, you would expect to find the gods there hanging out. Probably not, but you might believe that, okay? So that's a physical thing. You can see the mountain. If anyone told you, the gods don't exist, well, there's Mount Olympus. That's where they live. You could point to something. I can see it. The mountain's there. And someone might say, well, do you see the gods? Well, I've never seen the gods up there, but maybe they're hiding. I don't know. Maybe they're in the caves. Who knows? People come up with explanations. Nevertheless, so it's not always the case. There are exceptions that prove the rule, but it seems that in a lot of religions, this ultimate reality that people talk about and is so meaningful for them is not always directly visible or perceivable by normal means. By normal means, not necessarily not at all, but people might think that if you dance around enough or you say certain prayers or do certain rituals, that can bring you into a real encounter with this perhaps invisible reality. And this reality is generally conceived to be absolute. I mentioned final, yes? It's meant to be absolute or complete. It provides a complete explanation. It's conclusive for people. And it's eternal, or it continues in some way, okay? In some cases, it goes to a certain point and then it continues again. But you can't compare it to anything. It's unlike anything that we have in the normal world. And so it's a totalizing reality. There's nothing in human existence that's beyond its influence. From the beginning of the end, even beyond human reality, from the beginning of all things before humans even exist, until the end of time when humans may or may not exist, it is believed that this reality is total. It comprises even all of that. Nothing is beyond its influence, and hence ultimate reality. The Latin word ulter, and when it's feminine form and neuter form, ultra and ultrum, just so there's no confusion, but ulter means last, on the other side of something, beyond, the beyond. And so it's final, has that sense of finality, because once you're beyond, like if you asked a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, what is the beyond? Well, the beyond is heaven, to be with God. Well, that's one of the places. I won't talk about the other place. But the beyond, but there's nothing beyond heaven. It's final. You've reached the ultimate reality. Okay, it's ultimate. And it is a thing. Res, rei in Latin is the word for thing. It is real. It is the thing, the object of your desire. In fact, for religions, a lot of them, it is the only true thing. Everything else is an imitation or a copy or an illusion of that thing, an image of that thing. Why do I give you two forms, res, rei? Because in some languages like Latin, you have to give the nominative form, the subject form, but you also have to give the possessive form because sometimes it changes. The endings change a lot in Latin to indicate grammatical relationships. We don't do that very much in English anymore. We used to. I don't think there's anyone here in the classroom who would understand a phrase, a sentence in Old English, because there are a lot of changes, a lot of endings that change, like Latin. We still kind of have it in English when we use the possessive. Okay, the boy's book, the girl's dog. Okay, we add that S. So there is a change. We add on an S to it. But for the most part, we've lost a lot of those old grammatical endings that would change to indicate what's the direct object of the sentence, what's the dative of the sentence, what's the possessive. Well, Latin has that in abundance. Okay, and a lot of languages do too. So sometimes you have to learn both so that you can see where the change comes. So res is the subject form, and rei is the genitive or the possessive of a thing. So ultimate reality. It is ultimate because there is nothing beyond it. It is the beyond. When you're on the other side, you're on the other side, period. Whether this is conceived physically or existentially, whether you conceive it physically in the sense that you're going to a place, an actual place where you're going to stay forever, or existentially, if you see the ultimate as just a form of existence or a new form of existence or being. It is final and definitive. You're there, and there apparently is nowhere more to go. You can grow in that existence possibly, but it's ultimate. You're not going anywhere else. And it is real. It alone actually is. I just mentioned this a moment ago. For some religions, it is the thing. It is capital T. It is reality itself. And because it is the real, it is the source of reality. It can give purpose and meaning to everything else. It gives reason for everything else. From the highest form of a being, even a god, to the lowest, the atom. So ultimate reality is, I think, the basis or the essence of religion. And so religion, by my definition, would be the way that humans interact with this ultimate reality. Without having to redefine ultimate reality and make this a long definition. So religion, for me, would be the name for the ways that human beings recognize this existence of an ultimate reality, that it does exist, and importantly as well, interact with it, deal with it. Get this back to myself. Actually, if you're curious, you can just download the PowerPoint and you can follow along, okay? Okay, so that's the end of that PowerPoint. Let me just go to my next PowerPoint, which is religious studies. So religious studies is, I guess it's obvious, is studying this reality, this thing. I shouldn't say reality because I don't want to confuse anybody, but studying this thing called religion and studying basically people's understanding of ultimate reality, what they do about it, what they believe about it, how they act towards it. But religious studies is an academic, oh, that's interesting. Religious studies is primarily, well, I shouldn't say primarily, it is an academic field. It is a field of scholarship by people who commit themselves to studying religious belief, thinking about it, where it comes from, what it is, how does it impact the world. But as you can see in the religion, or excuse me, as you can see in the definition, it, as any academic field, well, I shouldn't say as any academic field, because theology is also an academic field, but in particular, religious studies takes kind of the road or the path of the natural sciences, in that it is primarily descriptive. It describes what it sees non-judgmentally. It's not saying whether something is right or wrong. It's not concerning itself with questions of truth or falsity, whether what the person is saying is true or not, or what the person is doing, whether that's true or not, or whether it's a good or bad thing. It's a good or bad thing. That's where you get into rather maybe sometimes sticky issues, because if you're a religious studies scholar, and or also people like anthropologists can encounter this if they're studying a culture and it's part of their religious belief to sacrifice things, let's say animals, I won't go full. And what if the anthropologist or the religious studies scholar has a moral objection to that? They're vegan or vegetarian or whatever, and they don't think that sacrifice is permissible. We don't do things to these creatures. That's not that the person might have the academic, the scholar might have a personal view on that, but as a religious studies scholar, that's not the purpose of the person's study. They describe the ritual, what it means for that community to do it, what purpose it serves, what's its function, where it came from. Now, I'm not saying that people don't, have commitments as well, and they might also try to study things in a certain way so that they can bring about change. They might think that as a religious studies scholar, if I can show the origins of this practice that maybe I do disagree with, I can show people why maybe the origins are not good, or they're false, they're not true, or whatever, and bring about change in the practice. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, okay? I think that as human beings, we all have our prejudices, we all have our things that we like and don't like, and would perhaps want other people to also like, or to also not like, and do or not do. And sometimes that can press into our study. I think academics and scholars are no different. But religious studies is trying to be non-committed, or as non-committed and as objective as possible in studying how people relate to ultimate reality, even when the beliefs or the practices might be difficult to accept for the person studying. The father of religious studies, at least modern, there really was no religious studies before this guy. So yeah, you can, without qualification, say he is the father of religious studies. Father in the sense of not the creator, but the originator, one might say, of this field of study, is a man called Friedrich Max Mueller. Hello. Back up. And you can see his dates there when he lived in the 19th century, from 1823 until 1900. That's weird. Whatever. And who was he? He was a German scholar, although if I remember correctly, I forget, he didn't actually come from Germany, because you have to remember in the 1800s, Europe was a mishmash of nation states, principalities, duchies, monarchies, empires, all sorts of stuff going on. Because you had I think Mueller was actually born in the Prussian Empire. Don't quote me on this, but I believe it's correct. So I could go two ways on this. There was the German Confederation, or there was the Prussian Empire. The Oxford Prussia, the Immanuel Kant was Prussian. I'm going to say, well, anyways, I'm just going to say he was German, in case you're wondering. You're Prussia, which included, like, at the time, included Poland, included large parts of Germany, modern Germany, a lot of Central Europe, and the primary language was there was a lot of German. German was one of the primary languages of Prussia. There was also the German Confederation, which is a whole bunch of city-states and whatnot in the modern country of Germany. Look at my notes, I should have written it down. But anyways, he was of German ethnicity. Might have come from either Prussia or the German Confederation. I'm leaning more towards the German Confederation because I have another person in my mind who's also German, Immanuel Kant, who came from Prussia, I believe. So I think it was the German Confederation. Nevertheless, at some time in his life, Mueller traveled to England, to Great Britain, where he spent the rest of his life. He taught at Oxford University. He was a linguist. How he got to studying religion was actually through language, through studying ancient languages like Sanskrit. Because you have to remember, at this time in the 1800s, in Western Europe, they still did not know very much about a lot of the Eastern cultures. So Hinduism, Buddhism, okay, they were still very foreign to them. No pun intended. Obviously they would be foreign to them, just like Christianity and Judaism would have been foreign to the people, a lot of the people in eastern part of Asia. Nevertheless, as empires expanded, the British Empire, France, well, Spain, yes, but more so, I think, the British, the Portuguese, people forget that the Portuguese had a very large worldwide empire. And they were coming through these empires, they were coming into contact with people who believed in Hinduism and Islam and believed in Buddhism and other religions like that. And so now you've got this new information coming in to these European scholars who, people like Mueller, were fascinated by this. And they needed to learn the languages so they could read them. So he was an expert in Sanskrit and stuff like that. And what he did was a great contribution was that, and thank God for that, because it took 5 years of German in high school, but I'm glad I don't have to read it anymore. But thank God, since he was in Great Britain, he was in England, he took his knowledge of language in these ancient languages like Sanskrit, and he translated the writings into English. So I say, thank God, and so you have this multi-volume set called the Sacred Books of the East. See that at the bottom. And it's in bold because it's probably his most lasting influence. His theories about religion are not really followed anymore. And I'm not going to go into them, but this Sacred Books of the East, this translation of tons of Hindu manuscripts, Buddhist manuscripts, all sorts of other manuscripts into English from these Eastern religions, it made them now available to a wide audience, people who didn't know about these things, and so they could be studied. And they're all in the public domain, since you can see his dates. And thankfully, people have transcribed them and put them online. So if you search for Sacred Books of the East, you can find them. They are on, I think it's called Sacred Texts Archive. And so you can go on there and look them. Also, if you go on like Internet Archive, the website Internet Archive, and you can find people have scanned the books into PDF files. So you can download them and look at them. And I use some of the readings that you have for the course come from this. And what's, in some cases, these English translations that he didn't do it alone. I mean, he had other people who helped him, but he did a lot of them just from his knowledge and study. In some cases, these are the only, or up till recently, they were the only English translations we had of some of these texts. Okay, certainly for free. And I'll tell you, Dr. Dunn likes free. Even the dollar store is too expensive for Dr. Dunn. No? Okay. I'm waiting for someone to come up with like the 50-cent store. And dollar stores aren't even dollar stores anymore, because they sell stuff for over $1. See, I'm watching. I'm savvy. I get it. Tried to be $5 and call it a dollar store. Anyways. But you can see, what did he do other than this? I mean, why is he called the father of religious studies? It's more than just doing translations. He was the one who made the argument, which, apparently no one had really thought of it before, just like with St. Augustine in his autobiography. Apparently people just didn't think, why don't I write a book about my life, from my birth, where I was born and the experiences I've gone through, But Augustine did, and so they believe that's the first true autobiography in literature, even though it's a religious text. Regardless, that it's, as a genre of writing, it's an autobiography. Apparently, the first. So you not necessarily, or he wasn't necessarily original, but he made the case that religion should be studied and could be studied rationally. We could examine. We should take. Before, people thought religion meant commitment. You studied religion within the realm or the orbit of your commitment to it. And then you studied other religions only to the extent that maybe you wanted to refute them, show that they were wrong. There wasn't a great movement to try to understand them, A Christian might write about Islam, but he might only be writing about Islam to show why Christianity is true and how Islam is maybe a perversion of Christianity. As early contacts between Islam and the West, that's what they thought. They thought Islam was a form of Christian heresy. If you don't know what a heresy is, then look in chapter 1 of the textbook from the reading, they give you a definition. They didn't realize that it was a true other religion, It wasn't a perversion of Christianity. But Mueller's like, no, we should study religion we might have commitments, but we should try to study it in a rational, non-judgmental way, in a systematic way, and try to also look at its origins. And he made these arguments. I mean, he wrote books about it, God bless you. Mythology, comparative mythology, Introduction to the Science of Religion, you see that. And especially influential was a book of published lectures called Natural Religion. The Gifford lectures are held up in Scotland at, I forget which university it is up there, but could be, whatever. It's held up at a university in Scotland, and they still do it. I mean, it's not like it's something from the past. They still have the Gifford lectures, I believe. And a person of renown or people know about, want to hear the person's views, can go up there and give multiple lectures on a certain topic. They put them together into a book and they publish them. And sometimes people will say, oh yeah, in Mueller's Gifford lectures, okay, fine. But the name they gave the book when it was published was Natural Religion, okay. And so he discusses his views in there and makes them more widely known, more open to the general public, of why he thought religion, just like anything else, should be studied in a rational and systematic way. Notice in the title of the book, The Science of Religion. You kind of, if I would delve a little bit deeper into this, you would see that, the natural sciences, okay, this is the 1800s. Before that's the 1700s, before that's the 1600s, especially in like around the late 1600s into the 1700s. What happens? Modern science starts to get going. People start the whole idea of the empirical method and testing things, coming up with hypotheses or theories of how the world works and actually testing them through observation, trial and error and stuff like that. That's modern science starts getting going. And by the 1800s, there was nothing modern science couldn't solve. Natural science was it. Especially in the case of studying something like religion, people were very interested in biological evolution. Darwin's theory of an evolution of living organisms into more complex ones through various mutations and adaptations. And so when he talks about the science of religion, he kind of means that. He kind of looks at it like a natural science, like you can almost take religion, put it in a lab and test it and figure out, oh, okay, yeah. Because the human brain works that way, therefore people believe in angels. So that's how the study of religion became forget about materialism. That's how the study of religion became a unique field of study. It is actually, well, okay, maybe I'll show this. It is, but although he calls it a science of religion in his book, in the title of his book, religious studies is not really a science. Just like anthropology is not really a science, nor is sociology, to some extent psychology. They're scientific, but they're not really sciences in the way that a natural science like, say, physics or astronomy, or as I mentioned before, geology is. Okay, there's a lot of subjectiveness, even in something you might think of like psychology, where they use a lot of testing and stuff like that. But there's still a lot of subjectiveness. Think of the difference between someone who does neuroscience and very much studies the brain and how it works, as opposed to, say, talk therapy. How do the two connect together? One is more so, and that's the psychology has the artistic element, the skill element of being a therapist, but then it also has that kind of natural science element they take from, say, neuroscience to understand, like, well, how do drugs interact with the brain, or how is mental illness caused by maybe damage to the brain and stuff like that. Okay, anthropologists, for example, here's a picture of a guy, one of the famous anthropologists, Bronislaw Malinowski, or Bronislaw Malinowski. Bronislaw Malinowski. Very famous anthropologist who, in this picture, you see he went out to Well, how do I describe it? Well, he went out to a place by Australia. He was going to go to Australia, but he went to these islands that are above Australia, which are now part of the country called Papua New Guinea. Not going to get into the whole story, but just, I need to tell you enough just to keep the story moving along. I'm not going to get too involved because then I might get going down into quicksand. You have to explain more and more. But there's this country nation, Papua New Guinea, that's right above the continent of Australia. And so he was Polish, but he went out there to study these islanders, these guys living on this island. And there he is with in a picture with them. Okay, and he spent his time there. He learned their languages. He lived with them. Apparently, he didn't decide to go to full Monty and dress like them, but okay, he still dressed like a European. But this was revolutionary because anthropologists at the time didn't really do that. A lot of anthropology at the time when Malinowski was living was what they called, armchair scholarship. People reading books in their libraries and then about faraway places and coming up with theories and writing about them. Or veranda scholarship, like sitting on the porch, watching things and then coming up with theories and stuff like that. Believe it or not, it just didn't occur to people apparently that, if I'm going to write about some tribe in Australia, I should maybe go out and see what's going on. I should maybe learn their language so I can speak to them and ask them questions. No, it didn't occur to early anthropologists. They thought it was all up here. No problem. Well, Malinowski went to sea. We've got psychology, Sigmund Freud, I mentioned. And we've got stuff like archaeology. I didn't mention archaeology, but archaeology, again, once again, it's scientific, but it's not really a science. I mean, you dig something like this up, okay, you do use the natural sciences because you can date the stone that this inscription is written on. Okay, so you can figure out by analyzing and carbon dating the stone, you can figure out how old it is. But what the picture means, who it's a picture of, what the language is that's all very interpretive and open to not necessarily, sometimes it can be objective and it's like, oh, this is definitely this. We know who this is. But other times it can be very subjective, especially if the text, you can see like text written across that, if it's in a damaged state or something like that, or if it's in a damaged state. Sociology just studies us and how we people act, and we do not always act in regimented, regular patterns, even though sociologists try to find them. And I mentioned neuroscience. Here's where psychology gets a little bit more science-y, where you're looking at the actual, stuff that can be quantified and qualified. You can get data from studying the brain, like, pH levels, acidity, blood, oxygen, stuff like you get data, you get numbers back. A lot of medicine is numbers. You get lists, and some numbers are good depending on what it's about, and some numbers are bad. And then it's up to you as the nurse or the doctor to crunch those numbers and decide what might be going on. So religious studies is not natural science in that sense. It's very interpretive, but that's okay because the word science simply means knowledge. It simply means knowledge. The word science does not just include the natural sciences. It includes just human knowledge in general. Scientia in Latin means knowledge, coming from the Latin word scio, scire, scivi, scitum, which means to know. Scio, to know. So as a form of knowledge, we can say that it is scientific. And sometimes its methodologies are scientific. It's some religious studies, yes, will use the strategies and the assumptions of the natural sciences and other fields in order to investigate its subjects. So as I mentioned to you before, in the 1800s and even now, religious studies scholars will use the results of biological evolution to discuss how they might think that religious ideas have developed amongst human beings, why people want to believe, okay? And they might use biological evolution, or they might use neuroscience to see which parts of the brain flare up, or where's their activity when people say that they're having a belief moment and where they're not, stuff like that. But one thing that unites religious studies and does not make it a theology, a committed aspect, is, as you can see, methodological agnosticism. The method itself is intentionally agnostic. Agnostic does not mean you don't believe in God or you don't know that there is a God. The word agnostic simply means don't know. Methodos is an investigation. Literally, it's a pursuit. A methodos is a way of going after something, pursuing it, but also in the extended meaning of an investigation. And even, interestingly enough, when I looked it up, a trick, like performing a trick, a method. And means not, and gnosko means to know. If you ever wondered why there's that silent K in kano, well, there you go. Gignosko. Greek and English are related languages, or cousin languages within the same language family. And so Greek preserves that k or g sound, gnosko, to know, kno something. Okay, it's silent now in English. But if you were speaking Middle English, you would say kno. You would have said kno, knifa, knicht, stuff like that. It would have been pronounced, but now we don't pronounce it anymore. So what is it? It's the pursuit of something without knowing, I guess, the result, you might say, that you intentionally take the attitude of not coming to a conclusion or not saying whether something is true or false. You're avoiding that question in order to study it, hopefully objectively, one might think. So religious studies, as opposed to, say, a normative or theological view, is non-committed. It's supposed to be neutral. And so it's not concerned with making positive or negative, true or false judgments on a religion. And it's also not fundamentally concerned with what they call facticity. Facticity or truth. Facticity means just whether a fact is present or not. Okay, they don't care. In religious studies, you don't care what the person who says that he or she is seeing the Virgin Mary in their taco chip is really seeing the Virgin Mary in the taco chip. You want to study facticity, the experience, and describe the experience. You're not there to make a judgment on whether the person is actually seeing this. What are the religious implications of it? So does this thing really exist, or did this thing really happen, as religious people say? Is this thing really true? These are not relevant questions for religious studies. It's looking for the visible descriptive aspects of religion, what I can see, what I can describe, the data. Theology, on the other hand, is a committed worldview. Usually it's from the viewpoint of someone who is a believer. Not always. I mean, you could have someone who's identified as an atheist teaching theology. It's possible, they don't have to necessarily be committed in that sense. Usually, you should be committed. That's the definition. But a person could conceivably say, well, I don't really believe in a God, or I don't know that there's a God, but I like to think about this subject and talk about it, and do research on it and why people do believe in God. And from this perspective, okay, it's possible. I'm not going to say it isn't. Why God? Because literally the word comes from the two words, theos and logion, which means the study of God, or words about God. Theos, as you know, is God, but a logion, the plural is logia, logion, logia, singular and plural, is a word or a statement. So biology is words or statements about living things, bios, bioi, actually, or Theology is words about God. Geology is words about the earth, Gaia, earth. Okay? It doesn't actually mean rock. Gaia comes from Gaia, which is the earth. So the study of the earth, the words about the earth. And usually it's done by an insider, someone who believes and lives the religion that's being studied. But, it shares its aim, just like with natural sciences or other science-like fields like religious studies. Theology does share the aim of ultimately providing a better or clearer understanding of the ultimate reality the person believes in and how it relates to human existence. Okay, religious studies people are also looking at that, but they're trying to look at it from a non-committed neutral point of view. But a theologian is someone who, from a committed point of view, also wants to understand, what does this ultimate reality I believe in have to say for anything? So theology is committed. It's not neutral. It's not agnostic, methodological agnosticism. It's not agnostic about whether something is true or not. Okay, there's the assumption that the things that I believe in are true, that they have value and meaning. Theology doesn't ask whether something exists or not. I mean, if you're a Christian theologian, you're going to kind of, at least for a Christian theologian, you're going to kind of have the assumption that God does exist. That's not an open question for you. Or that if you're a Christian theologian, that Jesus is important for Christianity. That's kind of like, tautology, obviously. You can't have Christianity without Jesus Christ, So yeah, you're not going to have questions about you're not going to be neutral about whether something exists or not. And theology, unlike religious studies, you have clear, identifiable assumptions about things like what reality is, where it came from, what's its purpose. Okay, if you're coming from, say, a religion like Islam, then you know where the world came from. That's not an open question for you. You know it was created by a God, and that this God is one. Okay, that's not open to debate for you if you're an Islamic theologian. Okay, that's not just a description of what you believe, it's what you actually believe. You're not agnostic on that point. And theology also thinks that its view is the correct one. Like any belief system, just because it's a religious point of view, you say it's the correct one. Well, that's your truth. Okay, fine. I accept it, but it's also your truth that the world is round. How do you know? How would you prove to me that we're not on a flat earth? The earth is not flat. How do you know? You've been up to space, you've seen it, you took pictures? Look! Flat. I see the horizon. It's obvious. I see it with my own two eyes. And you know what? I only believe in things that I can see. Makes sense, right? So theology, just like any belief system, assumes that the beliefs the person has are true, whereas religious studies is not operating that way. A religious studies scholar might have beliefs that he or she believes is true. They might have a point of view, but they're kind of pushing that down or putting that aside to describe the religion that they're studying. But theology does not. A theologian is open that he or she has a point of view. They think it's the correct one, or they think it's the most truthful explanation, or it's the most meaningful explanation of human life, which would explain why someone would be this rather than that. Okay, and I think that goes both ways. I mean, if I didn't believe that there was a God and I thought religion was simply something that comes out of the human brain, that the brain has developed a capacity to believe in things and to want to see things in the world that maybe aren't really there, but we kind of like it to be there, like when you talk to your cat, like your cat understands your problems. Cats are better than psychiatrists, except they can't prescribe the drugs. Well, you can't have everything. But I could see that. Then yes, I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic. Yeah, it's the same reality to me is going on. You have a commitment. You're making a commitment. You cannot, you think there is truth here and there's not truth there. You don't say, well, I'll believe in God just because, well, does people like it and just go, you go along, to get along. And a lot of people believe in God, but no, you think you're right. You're right. You think your view is truthful. You have a point of view. And theology does the same. And just because it has this point of view doesn't mean that it necessarily is treating another point of view unfairly. You just have to be clear where you're coming from if you're a theologian. You have to be clear to say, I am a Christian, but so that when I'm studying this religion fairly, that I have certain presuppositions about the world that this other religion I'm studying, the believers probably would not share that view. So someone like me, Dr. Dunn, I'm a Catholic theologian. Misericordia is a Catholic university. Our context is religious, overtly religious. I mean, you see a statue of the mother of Jesus as you're driving in. Okay, they put it right out there for you. Granted, she's standing with her back to you, so that's kind of a slight, but I don't know. Apparently she really admires Mercy Hall. What a nice building. Jesus, come over here. Look at this building. So I'll be clear up front. I am not an unbiased source of information on world religions. I believe in a certain world religion, one of the ones that we'll cover. And I don't claim to be unbiased. I do claim to try to be fair. That doesn't mean I rag on every religion that's not my own or belief system that's not my own. That's not the purpose. And that's certainly not the purpose in an academic setting where fairness is expected and accuracy. So I have particular views on religion in general, and which religion I think that humans will find the most meaning and fulfillment, i.e. Jesus and his church, the Catholic Church. But that religious studies element is also there, where primarily in this course, spoiler alert, it's not a theology course per se, in the sense that we're kind of analyzing like what is religion in and of itself, and what is our search for God, and we're talking like that from a Christian perspective. No, this is a world religions course where I will be giving a descriptive and a fair presentation of each religion that's covered, despite the fact that I acknowledge that there is a truth that I believe in, All right, I think that's enough. I think that's the end of the PowerPoint. Yay! Okay. Thank you very much. I will see you on Thursday. God bless you all. This mask is killing me. Okay, how are we going over here? So I'm going to turn you off. Turn you off. Okay. This. Okay. Boy. Okay, so this is the end of this. So I'm going to, everyone has left, and so I'm going to stop. I didn't say just stop. So I think I said I'm just going to stop, but whatever. I'll have to go back and review the tape.